in theory, I'm live. So I'm just testing it out right now because I don't know if I needed to open this in YouTube or if it would just work from here. Oh, PNG tuber died right away. Oh, I guess it just like continues until I bounce again. Maybe I do want more bounce. I didn't realize the bounce was like at beginning of sentence or whatever. Anyways, he's kind of working out. Yeah, I like him. I mean, he's black and white, but whatever. So presumably that's working. So if I go to my face and I click my face, yeah, it says I'm live, right? Okay, yeah, it's working. So that can go away. I don't need to double hear my voice, and you don't need to double hear my voice. So let's like properly kind of start this up and do an intro. Do like this. It's a me. So I had a question from my student about what is rendering. What do people mean when they talk about rendering a drawing, right? And so rendering, as it refers to in like the arts, is rendering a form. It's the difference of a circle and a sphere, the difference of a rectangle and a cylinder, right? You communicate the form, right? Rendering the form. You communicate more information about that object through the rendering, through like how you shade it, right? So it's really about lighting, but it depends on what that form is. You know, does it have texture? Is it reflective? Is it shiny? Because if it's shiny, it'll have more of like a specular highlight. If it's not shiny, it's not going to have that, think fur. And yeah, so we're just going to get into what that looks like and how to treat it well. But I will preference before really getting into that rendering is kind of a late game complicated thing in the arts. And so don't don't so if you're just learning to draw, consider not doing it, not getting into rendering right now, because there's a problem that occurs with artists where you sort of try to hide your mistakes and your problems by rendering. People go like, they'll do a drawing and they're like, the anatomy is not really there, or like the structure is not really there, or maybe like you don't understand the structure or anatomy when you drew it enough to do the shading, and then you do the shading, you do the rendering, and it's kind of like a polished turd in practice. And so we want to avoid that. You want to have a good structure and a good understanding of that structure before you start doing rendering and shading, because it's just going to be like a muddy thing. So that being said, experiment and try it, because to do art is to take risks, right? So take risks and try the shading, try the rendering, right? I just wanted to put that preface there, because if you end up having difficulty with this, or you're like, that's not working, know that this is like a late game thing. So like if you're having trouble with it now, it's really like more about experimentation and fun. You should be on the like, what is anatomy, drawing well, what is structure to start with, in kind of like an order of events things, or just do whatever you have fun with. I'm not trying to yuck people's yum here, right? If you're if this is something you enjoy doing, do it. That's rule number one for me is have fun doing art, right? So all that being said, let's do this and do this. But ciao! Now I'm a cartoon character, and also this. This is some other person's hand. It's not this guy's hand. It's this guy's hand. I'm this guy, and this is a disembodied hand. Yeah, it's two different people. But anyways, rendering. I would zoom in if I could, but I've only have this one guy's hand. His other hand is used for a mic that is not me. Sorry, I'm doing too much garbage over here. Let's actually like get into it. So annoyingly, I'm gonna have to still use this mic while having to draw. But like rendering is all about shading, and the thing it's really about understanding light, right? Rendering is how does that light affect that object. I've not like done any kind of like practice or anything for this, so we'll see if this even like works. I like zoom in a little bit. Cool, right? So yeah, let's just like as with everything, that's almost a circle. I can like barely draw a circle now. I'm nervous. Also, like I can't really like I have a tendency when I want to do this and draw, and also like this is flat and I'm standing. Anyways, I'm just giving myself excuses. And probably I shouldn't be doing this with like because like rendering is about edge control. It's like a thing I'm not about to get into right now. But yeah, let's try to get like another. Do I even have like an actual pencil? You do want something that's like shade. So like a good medium that has like a lot of black and a lot of tonal variety. Yeah, I'm gonna use my actual. I've been really into using um, this like lead pencil because I've been trying to get into more detail oriented stuff, and it forces me to kind of like get to the point and what have you. But like I used to always use this because I like drawing in this kind of position, which I talked about in the other live stream, right? This kind of locks off your arm and shoulder. Actually, you're supposed to grab like this. Uh, and I don't. I draw. Anyways, uh, this is a better position to draw. But anyways, rendering is all about like light uh, understanding and communication. So if we have like a light source over here, and it's hitting this three-dimensional sphere, that's like the goal here was to communicate a three-dimensional sphere and not a circle. How would we do that, right? But we would have to understand how this form works and understand how shading works. I've not planned any of this conversation, this lesson, so I feel like I'm kind of stalling for time. So if this is where the light is hitting, you're going to have a gradient go across this form. Let's kind of describe the form more like this. If it's like flat here and curves more and more as we get to the sides, right? I think all of those news icons you see all the time. Right? We want to describe this curvature, but with the light. And so if it's out here, you're going to have something like a specular highlight, which is to say that's the most direct place the light is hitting. So that's going to be very white. And it's going to gradient out from there. So the rest of this is going to be less lit, let's say. But still, so this will be an actual highlight, and this will be the color of the actual light source, right? The specular highlight is what I mean. Let's zoom in even more and, you know, embarrass myself with the close-up of this thing. Can I move over there? Not really. Oh, I guess I can just like move the whole thing down. Manual this shit. There we go. Or I could like draw bigger, I presume, but anyways. So the specular highlight is going to be the color of the light source, right? So usually like white, but I say this because And the rest is pretty much usually like the what's called like local color. So let's say like source. And local colors, right? And the reason why the sphere actually for rendering is the really like the best thing that you could be learning to do, because it's a very basic form, very basic shape. But if you can do and understand rendering for a sphere, that same principle works on everything. It's just about translating that communication. So, like here, it's a sphere, and you know that you're trying to show a sphere. So, like you know how its form works and what you're going to show and how light should act upon that form. But if it's a cylinder, let's say, the light's going to work differently. We'll look at that in a second. But yeah, so then you're going to have the shaded area, and you're actually going to have something that's like a bounce light. So the light is never going to, the object is never going to be by itself, right? The You're never going to be drawing a character literally floating in space or some such. They're going to be in a room, right? So presumably there's like a floor down here. I'll just draw kind of a square to describe. I gotta stop doing this thing where I'm do multiple lines. Just draw the line and like get it over with, you know. So presumably it's sitting on like a plane down here. What's going to end up happening is that light is going to it's going every which way through the room. And some of that light is going to end up like bouncing kind of off a wall or some such somewhere and end up underneath. So when you're describing something on a plane, on the ground, or existing in any kind of a room, it's going to have a bounce light. And what that's going to create is that this whole area is going to be shaded. In a gradient where the darkest point of the shadow is going to be just after the highlight, and it's going to fall off from there, right? So this, which is called the umbra, right? This little like dark area here is called the umbra. I don't know. Well, so that you remember it, that's why I'm saying it like that. Umbra, right, is the darkest area of an object, of a form, of rendering. And it should fall off from there, which is to say it's going to act as a gradient from that point, and it's going to fall off. The other reason this is the darkest area is because of this bounce light phenomenon, right? So the bounce light is usually, as a result of bouncing, is the color of the thing it's bouncing off of. So if this ground was blue, right? So if this was blue, then the bounce light would be blue. Right? But it doesn't even really matter. I mean, like it matters. What I'm saying is that this is like another thing to worry about. The point I'm trying to make is that it'll be lightest on this like bounce area. And that's why the umbra is the darkest. You'll have kind of maybe even an edge highlight, let's say, down here because of the bounce light, depending on how strong or what have you that bounce light is. And it's also kind of a stylistic thing. A lot of people like to include a bounce light, not necessarily because of um, like reality or like good rendering technique or something like that. Though all of that is true, but not necessarily, right? It's a pick and choose type situation. The arts ultimately is, what are you trying to communicate? What are you trying to say by doing that? And I think communication and clarity is actually a major point in the arts, and it's ultimately lost. People don't understand that what you're trying to do is communicate something. You know, it's like a vision of it's the dream you had last night, or it's like a world you're trying to portray, or it's a character doing something. There's something like a narrative or conversation there. There's something that you're trying to say, something that you're trying to communicate. And so this bounce light helps with clarity. Imagine nothing is ever just a object on a page, right? If you're doing an image, you're doing a full image, you're doing like a character in a room or like a character on a page. And the reason why people like a bounce light, again, not necessarily because it's like the realistic thing to do, but because like this whole image is going to be colored. And if they're even a similar tone, you're starting to lose contrast, right? If you have like some nice tonal difference, this pencil needs like sharpening. If you have some tonal difference, that helps, right? We can now differentiate the character from the background. It becomes a clearer image, a more understandable image. But like that might not be the case, right? You might have like a character in a darkened room, in which case that whole room might be quite dark, and you might not have a lot of tonal contrast there, right? And without that tonal contrast, it's a lot less clear. It's a lot less, hey, what are we looking at, right? And the highlight, right, like this highlight is not sufficient in describing the fullness of the form, right? You might get this is where like really like I should have worked ahead and known that I was going to have specular highlights here, because it's hard to erase things. Right, so you might get something like this, or even like more fully describing that far edge. Still maybe have your line work in there, or the actual edge of the character. Right, but that line is really, we shouldn't even have this line on the other side. Like the white should act as the line for that far side. And you see, I'm already trying to like draw this far line in, because the character's like not visible. And so that bounce light acts as something that can further define this form now. Because yeah, we have this highlight that describes the side the light is hitting. So this side of the room would be presumably lighter, Come to me, needable eraser. Shall fix all my problem. There we go. And so you'd have the specular highlight describes one side of the form, but that's hardly the fullness of the form, right? We don't know what's happening with the other side of the character. And so having that bounce light helps further the fullness of that object. And it's the same way it acts, it's the same exact thing with a sphere. You want this specular highlight that then becomes an umbra, which the umbra isn't like, I don't think, immediately after. Oh, I don't want this. It's going to be a gradient from the specular highlight. like I said, right, you're going to have the local. So you're going to have the specular highlight, that's the brightest part, that then goes into like a gradation towards the umbra. The umbra will be your darkest part of the shadow. And then we gradate out from there until the bounce light, which won't be like white. It won't be the equivalent of the specular highlight. The specular highlight is always going to be your brightest thing, right? So to kind of like define our terms here a little bit and also the values. Highlight, like it sounds, is the light that is most high. It's probably going to be something like a full white, right? It's probably going to be something like 100% white or like pretty close to it. It depends, honestly. Nothing is so one note like this in art, but it's the brightest for sure. Let's just say brightest. But it'll be like a near white, very close to white, but it depends on the material itself that you're trying to describe. So if it's very reflective, very shiny, wet, what have you, and it bounces light, then it's going to be very close to the light intensity. So it's going to be very close to that light intensity. The actual source of the light is going to be always the brightest thing, obviously, but presumably it's not in the image, right? The sun isn't going to be in the image with the character oftentimes. The lamp probably is not a bare bulb directly behind the character, so forth. You're going to have the local color. I'm going to spell it the American way, not because they're right, but because I'm lazy and I hate to waste time on one more letter. Color. But yeah, that's going to be, I mean, it again, this depends in terms of value, but it's going to be something of like a 50% gray, let's say. Because I'm trying to think like value. If we do a whole like value scale like this and we go white, like somewhere up at the top to like a full black, which I don't even know that I can create with this pencil. I want to get all the way to the white, and we want to have that scale. White. We want full black, which this isn't even. If I get like a marker, you'll see how this is not full black, right? But anyways, that's the tonal scale. And you're going to want to have scal. You're going to want to have basically like the full range of tones, like anytime you're rendering things. Again, I guess that's sort of like preferential, really, but it just means you have more contrast and more range. Was the only kind of black thing I could find. I'm just going to do kind of like point to form or what have you, because like this obviously doesn't blend because it's a marker. And you want to have like that scale. It's just gonna, contrast is nice, but this like really like makes it pop, and you have like a full range. You have like more that you can kind of work with here in terms of like a tool belt. Uh, yeah, so the local color, let's just say for now, maybe is going to be something like 50-50, like black, white. Look, quiet. What is the like abbreviation for white? Just the. And Umbra is going to be your darkest. Oh, my cartoon face is blocking it. Umbra. Put this marker out again. Just Umbra might not be black. In animation, there's kind of like a go-to rule, I guess, that you never actually use full like 100% black when you're doing something, and that has to do with like contrast. So basically, like once you go 100% black, you never go back. Once you go 100% black, this is a real thing. This wasn't just for that joke. Once you go 100% black in any kind of like image, let's say in your background, you have to have a character on top of that, right? So you've already like put yourself up against a literal wall. If you're up against 100% black, oh, I need more contrast here. There is nowhere to go. You've already done 100%. So for one thing, it's to always have options available to you. If you don't go 100% black, you have the option down the line to like up that contrast and as needed for things and put focus on things. The other thing is it's very flattening. 100% black is very flattening because again, because there's no real range there. If you color something fully black, you've lost like this kind of description here, right? Of rounding out a character with those bounce lights and specular highlights. So it's like really flattening. So though we do kind of want full range, animation at least tends to avoid full black, which is, I mean, there's maybe like a better definition there than maybe I have today that I'm not aware of, but I know it to be a thing. And I'm just thinking now that you do tend to get this like thing in live action where it's the truest blacks. And I don't mean racially. I mean like as a screen, and they're like, oh, that it has such dark blacks on this television screen, and there's been a move to get into like darker and darker scenes and like moodier scenes because that's like a thing that LSD screens have been more capable in doing. But that's never changed the fact that anime and animation has kept away from going full black like that in terms of like tonality, right? So anyways, Umbra is going to be like your darkest area. And then there's like your bounce light, which is going to be still darker than I'd say than your local color, but like still pretty similar. Bounce, flat. Right? Do things in capitals. Words no longer have meaning to me. So that's going to be like, I don't know, like 70, like, classifying things in this way really is confusing because it's not like I've ever thought about them in these numbers. You don't need to like remember these numbers. It's just the fact that the local color is going to be whatever you deem it to be, right? The local color, local like tonality is going to be whatever it is for that thing. And then you're going to add the tonality to it. So this is where it's like darker, but the point is it's going to be quite far from the Umbra is really like the only thing there. So in terms of like actual rendering, in terms of like paper, this don't look too great, right? And that's because, and again, this is kind of what I'm, and there's the actual cast light. I'm just thinking because I'm about to add it over there. Cast shadow, I mean. which is gonna be pretty close to like your umbra, at least like in its darkest point, because it has to do with where isn't there light, right? A shadow in itself is not a thing. It's not a depiction of anything. It's an absence of. It's an absence of light, right? So a cast shadow, if we do, so the light source is this way. So our cast shadow is going to be basically the polar opposite of that, right? But it's going to be darkest to start, and then it's going to fade away basically. Darkest here, and like I was just saying, shadow is the absence of light, right? So it's darkest here because it's just like the least likely place for any kind of bounce light or anything to like affect darkest. Of shadow. Right? So cast shadow. So it's going to be like pretty close to your umbra, and then it's going to like fade off. But the thing I was about to get into before I got sidetracked about this cast shadow and the darkest part of the cast shadow and being on a plane is that like this don't like look too great. And that's because rendering, like I was saying, is about like edge control. It's about the actual blending, let's say, of the form. And this is just like not really allowing me to do a lot of blending. And I don't have like a blending like tool. So I'm just basically doing it by actually. What I would do normally, though, like traditional rendering is not something I'm particularly experienced with, being like predominantly a digital artist throughout my career. What I would do when I was doing life drawing and such is like literally get my finger and like smudge it, but like pretty small thing, pretty big finger. Not a lot of detail work that I can do there. But that is like the idea. We want to be smudging, literally, this umbra because we're trying to get a gradation. We're trying to get something that's going from this darkest and gradating out into a lighter color. And so like also why I like this actually is because like it don't smudge easily. And where it does smudge, it's usually because like I want to, because I've like done a lighter thing. Right? It should have like a gradation. So that's just how shadows be. Now I'm smudging the cast shadow, but the thing with cast shadows is the closer an object is. I'm also just gonna smudge up this paper a little bit, make it seem like it's got its own local color. The thing about cast shadows, and well, let's say another thing about cast shadows is not only will they be the darkest where they're least likely to get light hitting them, they're also going to be the sharpest. They're going to have the sharpest edge, the most defined edge, which is what we are basically referring to when we're talking about edge control. Is that it should be sharpest at that edge. Oh, I'm kind of apparently running out. Oh, wait, no, there it goes. Of my detail eraser. Get it at your local art store. But yeah, it's going to be the less blurry, the least blurry, at the beginning of that cast shadow, because that's where it's closest to the object that it's casting off from. And so it's going to have a very sharp edge, a very defined edge. But then it's going to start to blur off as we get further out into that cast shadow. So we're going to get a very sharp. This is actually, let's use my actual little thing. It's going to be very sharp right here at the beginning, and then it's going to move out from there and start to blur and start to be less defined and also less dark, because that's where it's kind of going out and figuring out its own thing. It's going to start to get influenced by I guess the opposite of shady people. So it's going to be darkest right where the cast shadow is, right where it is closest. That's like the least likely place for it to interact with bounce light, any kind of atmospheric light and what have you. And yeah, the specular highlight. I still don't like the umbra color, that tonality that I have here. I feel like it's not working. It's just standing out too much for me, for my liking. The other thing is, I'm not really, it still doesn't feel like it's three-dimensional. And I think the aspect of that is, let's have it actually slightly touch the edge here. Because I just find that that helps define the actual form. Like, you know what it is? It's because I'm drawing it like a proper circle. So the problem I'm realizing is I'm doing like a bullseye situation, and it's not defining the form well. So already I'm a veteran artist. It won't look like it, but I am a veteran artist. And so rendering just like is technically complicated, right? So the issue here is that if I have a circle that I'm trying to make a sphere, and I have a proper circle as the specular highlight, that's just not how that works, right? Like even if you just imagine like putting a sticker on a sphere, and you look at that ball now in front of you, it's not going to be a proper circle, right? It's going to be warped by the perspective of that sphere. And so it should really be something more like this, like more of like an oval shape, because it's getting distorted in this way. The perspective is flattening it in this way, in this direction, because like if it was on a ball like this near the edge, it would be flattening it on the like horizon type side. So this actually needs to be more of an oval here. And that's also true for this umbra. Let's go back to the I've already forgotten what this is called. Lead pencil? There's a word I'm looking for, I can't remember. So I'm going back to this just because it's so inherently sharp all the time, this thing, that it's allowing me to get darker blacks. Now, the way I'm doing the Umbra here, it's addressing it as though, you know, the only kind of light source it has to deal with or what have you is from the specular highlight. But it could be from a lot of places, right? Like you could have the Umbra be going like down the side. It depends, um, both what you're trying to depict and basically like what you think looks best, right? In a compositional sense, because like maybe it just simply is more interesting to have like it go down the side like this, or just more accurate. I'm like, I'm not doing this from a reference, which probably I should be. I say probably. I should be. You should be definitely if you're learning, but I'm just trying to like depict something here. You want to get away from biases when you're doing art is a big thing, because we have a lot of bias, and I don't mean, I don't know what what other meaning you might find, but I guess the what I'm trying to get at is you assume things with like the logical part of your brain, and you try to implement that. You know what? I need to like actually like look at this from the top. This is flat on a table, and I'm having to look at it at like an angle. This doesn't describe anything really. At an angle, and uh, I'm like, oh, am I having a perspective situation? But anyways, I've completely lost my train of thought on like what I was trying to figure out there. What I was trying to explain. Yeah, your biases. So you really want to, when you're learning art, when you're learning how to draw, get away from these biases, because what ends up happening is that you assume things with the logical part of your brain, um, and you're drawing with that assumption of how something should look or how something should work, and you're drawing based off that assumption, when in reality that's not how it works, right? And you haven't like learned the truth of the matter, right? The truth of the form, the truth of the, you know, color spectrum. It's like when people paint like skin tones, right? If you were to paint my hand, if you were to paint this hand, a lot of people would be like, I don't know, like, if you weren't looking at this image, let me move my hand away, I guess is the thing. If you were to paint my hand off of like what you remembered of a hand, you'd go like, I don't know, anime kind of does like a kind of yellowy pink, right? Let's do that. And then you would just do that in general. And there is like, you need to generalize and simplify things when doing animation, because we don't have infinite time, right? But to actually scrutinize a hand is to realize like we are composites of many little things that you've taken for granted, right? So if we like look back at it, right, my hand is like many different colors and shades. I don't know why I'm so particularly veiny here. I guess I'm dying. But like my palm is different than my wrist, right? But even any part of my hand or arm is not to say one color and then some tone, right? There's a different color that describes the shadow area of my wrist compared to the tonal area of my palm. It's not just like, oh, well, there's like my palm is pink, and then we add 50% black for the shadow, and then we also add 50% shadow for the wrist, right? There's a behavioral difference uh, on those two different forms, where you're going to have maybe like more of a purple in the palm and more of an actual blue or like a dark red for the shadow of the wrist, right, compared to the shadow of the palm. These kinds of analyses are the sort of thing that's going to make you a better artist, by drawing from life and drawing from reality, because you're not just taking the final version of another artist's interpretation, right, and not realizing why they've made those leaps and bounds. You're going to the source and discovering it for yourself. Oh, what is that? What is making that work and behave that way? And how would I interpret that? And then you come to those realizations. Having said that, copying existing artists' work will advance you like leaps and bounds, because if anything, a sort of muscle memory happens when you're like tracing other people's work and recreating other people's work. You're going to get this phenomenon where you're like, oh, like I've been tracing this guy's work or recreating this guy's work for so long that I can just create those images again really easily and really quickly. That's still an asset. But if you are trying to I think what I'm trying to say is you should always have the fallback of like doing that research yourself, because then you're not you have the speed and versatility and like kind of quick learning of taking that experienced artist's work and, you know, ingraining that into yourself, but also you know why they did that and you can make alterations to that behavior, right? You can choose to do something differently but still have it be as effective, but more specifically in the way that you want it, if I'm explaining myself at all correctly. That way you can produce their quality, but it's more versatile and ranged. Right? So anyways, a sphere. I think we can, it's been 45 minutes. I think we can get off rendering a sphere, right? But I think that describes what rendering is. It's all about describing a form, because this started off as just a circle, but now we have a sphere with like that exists in an environment, right? Where before it was literally just a circle. So rendering is like, how do we take this sphere here, right, and make it communicate clearly that it is a sphere? Circle to sphere. Right? That's basically what we're getting at. But that should work for anything. And so let's take it to its kind of like culmination point, which is what that everyone wants, which is like characters, right? Everyone wants to like do their OCs and like do the best kind of job on those OCs. So I'm not going to attempt to suddenly draw like a character here because I'm embarrass myself. I don't have like a go-to OC or something. But actually, I do have like renderings, I guess, from like light drawings in this book. Yeah, I don't think I actually like did any rendering. It's just also, I guess, like nudity warning. Yeah, there's not really like rendering here per se. I was like doing portraits for like a while because I'm just trying to like get into faces. Get kind of like better at portraiture. Yeah, I guess we'll just like use this. This is like looking pretty good, and I don't like really have any rendering on it per se, so we'll just use that. And let me get like a little flippy do here. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, some ass. That's gonna get that viewership up. But anyways, anatomy and structure, right? So we have this like baseline character. How would we now take our rendering techniques, blah, 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 these rendering techniques, and apply them to a character, right? So again, this is like advanced stuff. I don't necessarily want you to like jump into rendering characters. I'd much rather you, like if you're starting out drawing, I want this sort of stuff. I want like anatomy and pose and acting and that sort of stuff, right? Like communicate to me a good finished drawing. This isn't even a finished drawing. I think I came back to this later and I was like, let me at least like put a good face on it, just because it was so unfinished that it like hurt my feelings. But yeah, do life drawing and ignore rendering per se, shading for until you're like really confident with your life drawing, and then you can start getting into shading. But when you're doing when you're rendering a character, there's a lot of things happening, even with just like a person's back, right? For those people that are into that, you know, sports and fighting anime and whatnot, you're maybe aware like a back is quite complicated, and I've not really like defined all its little bits here. Like you're gonna have a scapula kind of form here, right? Those are your shoulder blades. That's what the proper term is, scapula, for your shoulder blades. And it has kind of like a top ridge. See, now the rendering is getting me to talk more about like anatomy than, I don't know, than people perhaps care about. There's like, this is creating like wrinkles in her upper trapezius muscle, which is the like triangular muscle that's on like your upper back. There's this very big protuberance of a bone actually at the back of your neck. That's like noticeable. It's called a landmark because it describes like where we are on the body, what the rotation is, that sort of thing. So landmark. But yeah, there's a lot of forms here. There's the trapezius kind of ends, the scapulas I'm maybe even drawing too big, and then you have like these little areas with like major minor muscles that I don't like remember their use for. I'm pretty sure they're something to do with like your scapula. You've got your uh, what is it, latissimus dorsi or something like that, which is like these two big major muscles that come down from your armpit and are basically like your wings. You know, if you know that one um, kind of famous shot of Bruce Lee um, flexing with his arms down in kind of like a teapot pose on both sides of his body, and like these two huge kind of muscles, like wing, basically describe the side of the uh, human body, the human torso. And so that's these like inner working muscles that kind of look like this. If I can like, you know, serrated. I think people often think of these as like abs because the only way they know to look at these is like, oh yeah, sometimes when they have so many abs, they have like these little abs up by their titties, up by their pecs, right? You'll get like these two pecs, and then you're gonna get your abs, which do this like really interesting shape, right? And then people will be like, oh yeah, and then there's like those side abs. Like I think that's how I used to think of them back in the day. It was just like, oh yeah, you'll get these like defined abs off here, off the side of the body. Tiny little abs. But that's not what they are. They're your serrated muscles, unless again, I am misremembering. And then people will draw this kind of thing, which is like presumably like you'd think they're muscles. I don't know, but they're it's actually just the bottom of your like rib cage. Yeah, rib cage, like the bottom does something like a this, right? And then there's like the actual abs, which connect from your sternum, which is like a kind of a bow tie. It's weird. Connects from your sternum to like your floater ribs, down to like your pelvis. Yes, shoulders, clavicle. Clavicle goes into your shoulders. So this is where like learning anatomy, just learning where muscles begin and end is very important, because that way you can go, oh yeah, so this actually goes into the armpit. But surprisingly, almost everything goes into your armpit. Oh man, I just realized I'm like barely drawing this on screen. So as much as eye shade is only ever really to, or render is only ever really to give clarity to something. Oh, like this object is up, you know, in terms of its, like this is up and then this is down. So if this is down, okay, let's like give it a kind of gradient shadow, because then it describes that form a little bit more. So mostly I just kind of do cast shadows, and I don't really render myself. Unless I'm doing like a digital kind of painting. And even then, I keep it pretty simple, because um, even at my level, if that's a thing, I find that rendering like really muddies the water unless you're willing to spend the time to like really do it well. Um, then it's just a very effortful, time consuming thing where you're not necessarily getting a lot back for all that effort. Where you could have kept it simple and uh, gotten a better like art piece out of it ultimately. You know what I mean? So, anyways, what I wanted to get into with like rendering the human form is that we're still basically just doing a sphere, but there's it's a much more complicated form than being just a sphere, but we're doing exactly the same thing, which is that where is the light source, right? Let's say, just for the sake of things, because I don't even like remember, I don't have this like reference in front of me, that the light source is in the same thing. It's kind of 3/4 in front of the object, the model in this case. So I realize like I'm still zoomed in, aren't I? Let's stop doing that. We don't need that as much. So I don't have to keep moving things around. This is meant to be a light bulb. People understand. It's important to me that people know that this is a light bulb. So presumably, let's do the light source as though it's still like 3/4 in front of the character. By in front, I mean like towards us, I guess, towards the camera. So all of this would be lit, and like maybe the bottom of the butt here would be a bit more of a shadow. There might be like a cast shadow here. It'd be this whole inner side of the leg. Right? But there's a lot of complicated muscles and forms that you would want to now be describing. And this is why rendering as a beginning artist is something that, or even like as a kind of intermediate artist, is something that you should really be avoiding unless that's the stage of kind of education in the arts that you're at. Learn, really get those fundamentals of form down first. So the thing I will talk about, if you are going to do characters for shading, is don't worry so much about the reality of how that. I know I literally just had a whole rant about do reality, you know, take from reality how to shade, and but this is, that is how you should learn. But this is basically the problem with, or the difficulty with, rendering for like the human form. You need to understand how shadow works and how rendering works by having studied like reality from life drawing and from models and from photos and what have you. However, when you go to apply that rendering to a character, I find that I can't really like talk and like draw at the same time. At least not in a like let's actually describe my point and not just ramble on. Which is why I keep having to like pause from drawing. When you're doing a character, you're not necessarily doing realistic lighting or the lighting that's like in your reference. You're going to be doing lighting that defines that form the best, because how your reference is unlikely to be in its like best version. But when you're doing art, the idea is that you're doing the best version. You're showcasing the best, cleanest articulation of that form. So don't worry so much about like rendering, let's say, this arm and the shoulder to be like a cylinder. Because if you had a cylinder, right, and the light source was like up here, then you'd have it go where the umbra is something like this. This would be sort of the specular highlight up here. And it goes into the umbra. From its local color, and then it's going to have like a bit of a bounce light of situation here. And then this side's going to be like just dark, presumably. Right? A sphere would be something like that. And when doing like a human character and shading and rendering a human character, there's going to be I don't know, like the expectation or what have you, or the want to do something like that. And I think it's just because like inherently it is rewarding, I guess. It looks good. You start to go, oh wow, like it's a form, right? Oh, I just like shaded in a circle and then erased some parts, and now it looks better. Now it looks like a ball, right? Probably you've literally done this thing where you've just been like, maybe it's not literally a sphere, but again, I'm gonna do a sphere. And you're just like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna like color it in, shade it in. And then, but if I erase this area up here, ooh, it's like a nice ripe apple now. It's like it took very little. That specular highlight does a lot of work, is the thing, right? And maybe even like, oh, you put like a little bounce light down here. This is like all anime eyes, or literally this. You have like a that bounce light, and you're like, wow, that looks really good. Now it's got like a bounce light and the specular highlight, and it just looks good. And I understand it much better as a form. And if you've been uh, if you're on my Patreon and be watching these videos, maybe you go, oh yeah, Cal said that there's something called an umbra, which is like a darker area just up in here. Maybe you're educated enough because you're one of my students that you know to put an umbra here. Oh wow, that looks like a lot better. Now we've got gradation and tonality and contrast. That looks a lot better. And then like, I know this shouldn't be as dark as the specular highlight. Oh yeah, looks better. That looks even better. Now that looks like an actual. Oh yeah, this is cast shadow, right? But my point being that like maybe you just erased a little bit of a thing and noticed, oh, I have a form and it looks a lot better. But this concept we try to put onto like the human form, but we basically don't know what we're doing. And so we're like looking at the model and we're like, okay, we're just gonna like erase this kind of general area. I'm gonna flatten it off. I'm gonna make a real square butt, even though that's like not how the butt be. But I don't even know that you would presume like this is a plane to make this um to to highlight that whole one area, right? The idea that I want you to get with rendering the human form is that I want you to not treat the human body as a cylinder, even though it is, because maybe we get there one day and that's like the advanced way to do it. What I want you to do is treat the human form as though they're like cuboid, like rectangular squares. I don't know how else to put it. So instead of a sphere, I want you to treat it like it's like this. And everything is a flat tonality. A different tonality, to be sure, because they're different sides that are going to have like different shade values, tonalities, right? Like each one of these tones are different. Don't even have space to different tonalities. I want you to treat the parts of the human body like this rectangle and not the sphere. Why? Why do I recommend this? Because this is a much clearer description than the sphere. Clear, right? Clear, even though that word is quite messy, but clear. So if we do and we treat our rendering like this, we now make our image much clearer. We now understand like which side is up, right? Like how I was saying with this chest. We understand which side is up, which side is down, and which side maybe is the side, or is just like another plane. Right? So if you treat it in this way and you have those tonalities kind of established, so like if this is the down, okay, it's that color. There's going to be like kind of a down where there's like a recess in this like lower back area. Okay, just shade that off a little bit darker. There's like the bottom or the back of the cranium is going to be darker. The underside of the head / neck is going to be darker because there's going to be a cast shadow from the head here. The underside of the arms, even though this is a whole complicated form, right? We have the, is it deltoids? What am I thinking? What's the actual proper name for shoulders now? You have the delts, and then the like trapezius that goes up into the neck and down into the back. There's like the triceps. And then there's like a little muscle in the actual armpit that I don't think we see from this angle. And then the latissimus dorsi, which is your big side / back muscle. So they're complicated forms, but basically like if you know them and like you want to do that like complicated stuff, which I definitely recommend. It's definitely educational and informative. Have that in there. But even with all that being said, I still want you to treat it like this. So do we see under the arm, right? Like in terms of planes, like are we seeing the top of the arm or are we seeing the bottom of the arm? Is the arm like this? And this is the top? Or is the arm like this? This is why I want you to be shading and rendering in this way. Because, I guess this would be, this is why I want you to render things in this way if you're learning, right? If you're somebody who's just trying to learn to be a good painter, a good illustrator, and you're trying to go for that like realism, then go for that realism. But in terms of being like a cartoonist, if you're into anime, if you're into like narrative art, and communication and efficiency, then do this. Even if you're like an illustrator looking to be like a magic realism and whatnot, this is still good because it's going to force you to think in a way that can be reused later. Because when you're doing it, like I want you to be in an active, engaged state when, and now your shading is much more descriptive. Actually, based on the fact that I seem to have like an indication, a landmark here of like her elbow, that her shoulder is actually sort of facing us, but I would presume that we were sort of seeing maybe a little bit of the bottom rather than the top, because I don't know, maybe we're at the same horizon line as like her eyes. We tend to keep the like horizon line for characters like are at eye level because it's just like a human versus human thing. So if our eye level is here, it's more likely we would have seen the top, but just because of how she's holding her arm up like this, probably we are seeing a tiny bit of the bottom. I could have, assumed or what have you that her arm is perfectly like perpendicular to the camera. But even if that was the case, which is impossible, right? You're going to get like a little bit one way or another. The rigidity of getting something perfect to camera is like near impossible. Even if it was, or it's seemingly so, presume that it's one way or the other. So we're going to see a little bit of the bottom here, and we're going to shade that off as though it's like these rectangles. And then the rest is going to be like local shading, which I usually like just leave it to whatever the smudge is doing, and then I'll like erase for specular highlights. And then, I'll presume the same thing with her arm here. I don't know that you can see because I'm right-handed and it's just in the way. And then something like her elbow will be here, and we get these like overlapping muscles that come from the upper part, or like the inside part, what you would presume to be like where the bicep should be, is actually where these muscles start. You'd get like this bicep, which is like in this like yellow area. And then you get this, I forget what they're called. You get this like triple-headed, if not literally three separate muscles that at least like the biggest head comes from this like upper part of the arm and creates that like teardrop shape, right? So if you look at my arm, this teardrop kind of shape starts surprisingly. Ugh, get it in. Starts like up here, right? Because like get this little crevice of like the inside of your arm, but this goes surprisingly up. So if you have like a very muscular person, you're going to notice that more, that it starts up that high, and people just like drawing muscular people, especially like while learning, because then you know where those muscles are and whatnot. Elbow, bicep. Yeah, we're going to shade off this bottom area to be descriptive. That's what I'm getting here, is it's just clearer to do it this way. We're going to treat it like she's more rectangular and render it in that way, rather than being, so particular about the anatomy necessarily. Now here, this is the bottom side, and I know her leg, I probably was doing this wrong, and actually like her leg needs to go out more into a knee, into like the bottom of her leg, to her feet. So this would be the top, right? This is now the bottom. this is more so what I would have starting artists doing, is treating it in this way of planes, right? Each side of this like rectangular object is a plane. Um, and even if you were doing like high level magic realism rendering, you'd still be thinking about this, but in a way that is communicative of every little muscle, every little bone, and what have you of this form. Um, but starting out as like a beginning artist, I want you to think of the body as a whole as those forms, which is to say the torso, you know, skull and cranium and pelvis. These are like the major forms of the body. And think of those not as how they are in reality, which is like very complicated forms of like, an egg that's bigger at the bottom, kind of a sphere that's like cut in half, what have you, or like, I don't know, a bucket. But as rectangular forms, which is to say, what side is the front, what side is the side, what side is the back, what side is the top, what side is the bottom, right? And in that way, this is where the rendering now goes into like, and why I'm getting into complexities here is, in order to do this, in order to get this rendering done correctly, you need to understand how the forms of the body work, what side is what side, in order to do this communication clearly. So the whole point of rendering is planal communication, right? Because if you do it wrong, then it becomes confusing and people go, I don't know what I'm looking at anymore, because you've, there's a light source. Clearly, this is the light source, but then this is lit over here. So now I'm confused. Like, where's that light coming from? Right. So it's all about like knowing how light works, knowing how it's going to behave on certain textures and objects, and understanding what that object is to truly communicate it clearly. And most likely, it's the human body that you're trying to communicate. So think of the parts of the human body as these three-dimensional forms. So the torso, the rib cage, the pelvis, and the head. Not sure that the like anatomy is working particularly great there, but it doesn't matter. We'll just say artistic license. So presume that this is done well and correctly, right? You get basically an egg shape for the torso, the rib cage, this kind of bucket for the hips, and then the skull is the cranium and the kind of face and jaw, right? And then the jaw is like the middle of the head where the ear would be. But this is cranium, face. So I want you to treat these as like rectangular objects. Right now we're looking at them from the side. So you'd have like something like a rectangle here for the hips, a very long rectangle for the torso, and I don't know, kind of like an L shape for the cranium and skull. Right? Looking at it from this angle, that's how it would be. But let's like three-dimensionalize this a little bit. So let's make it like a little bit more three-quarter to prove my point. Right? So these are like rectangular forms that I want you to think of for the major masses of the human body. And also, this is the orientation that like these masses are in like a person just kind of standing upright. You get this curvature of the spine, and the pelvis and rib cage work in like contradiction to each other. So if you had, if your upper body kind of tilted this way, your hips would tilt the other way to balance you out. And such. But if you think of the major forms like this, and then you think of the limbs as maybe just spheres, but still like ultimately rectangles in the way that you render, but spheres is just like easier. So you would have like spheres maybe for like a shoulder, um, cylinders for like upper cylinder with, and also have all of these with a taper, which is to say they start big and get small. They're all big, small rectangles. Big, small rectangle, right? Because that's just how muscles work, and so that ends up being how our limbs work. So again, big, small, big to small, thigh, kneecap, big to small, calves, and then like triangles for feet. This is like the most kind of basic description of it, but they're complicated in their own right. And like probably you're starting off, you're doing like mittens, for hands. And so if you think of the the body as these pieces, it starts to become like a lot easier to get anatomy and get rendering. So that's why I would push you to start with life drawing that looks kind of like this, because it's going to force you to think about, while you're looking at the model and all of these poses, to say, am I seeing the side of that torso? Am I seeing the side of the hips? Am I seeing the bottom or the top of the bottom of of the pelvis, right? And so that's going to help later on when you're doing rendering, but it's going to help you understand the form of that character in front of you, and it's going to by understanding it in that way, you can communicate it however you want later on, where you can go, okay, well, like my reference is in this angle, but I want to see more of the face, right? But because you understand the forms, you can go, okay, well, like then I'll just have more of that face plane and less of like the cranium inside of the head. A bit of a Loomis head here. Right? And now, oh wow, now I can draw characters. And it's a lot easier to draw characters and like rotate those character forms. And now that I understand like what is the front and what is the side for like a face in particular, okay, well I know like the like tip of the nose is usually like center of the front, and then like the half of that is meant to be where the eye kind of tip in is for like the like oculars or what have you. This is still quite a 3/4 thing. But then frontal bone and like top of the head. Chin. And because this is where like the side of the face should be, I probably made the front actually too small in this example. But this way you can go, okay, well, like that's where the side of the face should start. And human anatomy is such that like it doesn't end like abruptly, right? It goes off like a bit into the side of the face because we're rounded and such. And then the eyes are like inside of that recess. And it lets you do a lot more like rotation and figuring out and like anatomical stuff, let's say, right? Rotation, form understanding, shading, all of that. So that is my advice on what is rendering and like how to render. I was kind of contemplating to do a, oh, this is where my very naked man is. Can't handle that. We got man nipples on this side. You can't have that. Which is unfortunate because it's a very good drawing. What if I just stick this, I just stick this wad on his peen? That's probably gonna look worse. Yeah. Bam. Not quite so naked. That's probably gonna erase that penis now. That's a shame. It was a very handsome penis. Come from me, YouTube guidelines. It's educational. We'll see how this plays out in like a week or what have you. But he's so beautiful. I like how this drawing turned out. I think it turned out good. I like the face. I like the minimalist interpretation of body hair. It was quite a hairy man, but like you're not trying to draw all that, you know.